fan of fasting? Maybe you still fast regularly, or find that fasting has worked in the past but does not seem to work anymore. On today's episode of the Nutrition Couch, we deep dive the latest in fasting and specifically why it does not always work for women. Hi, I'm Susie Burrell.
And I'm Leanne Ward.
And together we bring you the Nutrition Couch, the weekly podcast that keeps you up to date on everything you need to know in the world of nutrition. As well as fasting, we have some new guidelines on the management of constipation. We have a healthier dip to add to your party platters, and our listener question is all about a popular supplement doing the rounds. So, Leanne, whenever I give a nutrition talk to groups of people, and I have given a few recently, so it sort of reminded me of the common questions and things that come up. And these were talks I gave to both men and women. You know, if you give a talk to a female group, sometimes the questions will be quite different. But in both situations where I spoke, I literally had an equal number of male and female audience, which is interesting because you do have to tailor it a little bit less hormones and a little bit more performance. And one of the most common questions I'm always asked in my talks is about fasting, intermittent fasting. And inevitably I'll have someone who is commenting that even though I might talk about the importance of protein at breakfast or having a long overnight period without food, inevitably someone will say, I don't eat until lunchtime because I regularly fast. And certainly, how long would we say fasting has been around in the world of nutrition? I'd say about 10 or 15 years. I reckon it came out around 2012. And of course, the initial information we had on fasting, well, actually, first of all, we'd known for many years that fasting or restricted calorie intakes for primates in particular did lead to longer lifespan. So that wasn't new. And then we had the 5 and 2 that came out where it encouraged 2 low calorie days each week to basically reset metabolism. And then not long after that, we had a slew of diet books following suit, you know, trying to flog the latest diet research in a best-selling book. And the 16-8 really evolved as an alternative to the 5-2, which stated if you sort of extended the overnight fast and didn't eat till later in the day, there were metabolic benefits from a calorie perspective. So in our world, which is all about trends, it went crazy for several years. Everyone's talking about how good it is, that they feel more in control of their appetite. Skipping breakfast means they were having less carbohydrate. It was supporting weight loss. Now, I am torn with fasting because what my experience is that people do convenient fasting for you. Mm-hmm. So they say they're fasting, but they'll still have a cheeky coffee. Or they will not eat until 12 or 2, but then overeat all afternoon, because I want to be clear that really when it comes to the key metabolic benefits, it's lower calorie diets that really basically shock the cell into metabolic efficiency. And I'm not talking about 3 or 4 day fasts where people only drink water. I'm not even talking about 24-hour fasts. I'm talking about specific low calorie days where you might have an hard-boiled egg or 2 for breakfast, a salad for lunch, and some prawns and veggies for dinner. Very low intakes, 500-600 calories for brief periods of time are shown to have metabolic benefits. The 16-8 I think is convenient dieting for you, because really if you are going to adopt an extended overnight fast, the best time to do it is in the second half of the day, where you would have your final meal at 4 or 6 o'clock and then didn't eat until 9 or 10 in the morning, or even better, stopped eating at 4 o'clock and then ate again at 8. So you're really then linking into circadian rhythm. So in my clinical experience with it, even though there is research studies to show some metabolic benefits, which might be improvements in insulin or fasting glucose or cholesterol, when it specifically comes to weight control, I don't find it helpful, because I think particularly for women, we miss the metabolic benefit that comes with eating early in the day. And as I've always argued, when it comes to low-calorie diets, my women need their energy. They need their calories. And if they've had a long history of dieting, the worst thing I want to do is encourage them to eat very few calories. It tends to promote obsession with food. It tends to lead to afternoon binging and overeating later in the day, and really promotes the diet culture that you and I would say never works long term and just puts people in a constant cycle of being on and off a regime. In saying that, if I've got a client who is well adjusted with their food intake and they are interested in longevity and they really do want to have either a long overnight fast where they might do a 12, 14, 16 hours without food, or a low calorie day, so they really might not go as low as 500-600 calories but might really limit intake on a day of the week, particularly after a weekend when we tend to overindulge. I don't have a problem with it, but I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. And if I've had a client who's, as I said, had a long history of dieting, has insulin or hormone issues, is perimenopausal, I certainly don't encourage it, because I know there's been more and more evidence in sort of the popular podcast doing the rounds, people like Stacey Sims, who are arguing that really it's not good for women to be delaying the first meal of the day or training even fasted, because it tends to not benefit us metabolically in the same way that men may get that, given they've got more muscle mass and are not subject to the hormonal changes of peri and postmenopause or even pregnancy and breastfeeding, which impacts our ability to metabolize body fat effectively and efficiently. So my position is I use it occasionally in those areas. I think I've had 1 or 2 clients in my entire career who have adopted the 5-2 successfully. One was a lawyer who really was very limited activity-wise because of her job, and she didn't actually mind having a low-calorie day. She actually found it helpful to minimize her distraction of food. But that's one client out of hundreds, if not thousands, I've seen in my 25-year career for whom it worked and didn't do more abnormal metabolic damage. But it doesn't lead to 10-kilo weight losses. It might be a kilo every month. It just is a gradual sort of reprogramming, I find, of metabolism, if you find someone to do it properly. But most people I do creep over into much higher intakes, and that is not the original 5-2. So they might start with the best of intentions, have a coffee, a salad, and then they might have a few crackers, then another coffee, and 500-600 calories very quickly becomes 800, 1,000, and you'd argue that you're not really doing it either. So yeah, that's my position on it. And when I do a talk and someone says that they don't eat until lunchtime, what I will always say is, if that is working for you. So I had a lady in my talk who was Brazilian, very slim, very relatively young, I'd say, 30, 40. And she said to me that she finds that she eats her first meal at 12, and then she eats her lunch at 3 or 4 and her dinner at sort of 7, 8, and that worked for her. And I said, there's always individual differences in this. It's not a one size fits all model. If you are healthy, if you have your energy, if you don't have any negative issues, if you're happy with your weight, and that eating model works for you, I would never change it. But if I've got someone who is trying to get cravings under control, finds that they're overeating at night, does have metabolic issues, is struggling with energy, they're the people that I find that it's more negative than positive. And often people aren't really fasting. They think they are, but they're still having tea or coffee, which is, of course, not fasting. It would have to be black tea, black coffee to be a true fast and get those metabolic benefits. So I know you spoke to Stacey Sims on your Leanne Ward Nutrition podcast, which is a very in-depth nutrition podcast for anyone who wants to extend what you hear on the Nutrition Couch. I know you've done a couple of interviews recently with hormone health and metabolic health. I'm right in what I said about Stacey, wasn't it? She had fairly firm views on that.
Yeah, basically her view is anyone who is exercising or training or looking for a performance-based benefit should not be fasting, and that's mostly women. And if you look at a lot of the research, unfortunately, most of the research is in men, and most of the research, if it is in women, it's in a lot younger women, because it's really hard to get research people who are women who are going through pregnancy, who are postpartum. And this is particularly, she works a lot with athletes. She's saying a lot of these athletes, if they're in those childbearing or hormonal years, you're not really going to pull them into a research study. Most of that research is done on men or a lot younger women. So she was basically saying if the goal is to perform, you need to fuel regularly. And a lot of my clients I don't recommend fasting for, because they are exercising in the morning. I'm certainly a morning exerciser. If I don't get my session done in the morning, there's a 95% chance it's not going to happen for the rest of the day. I just have to do it in the morning. If not, the day just gets away from me. I don't do it. I don't enjoy afternoon exercise. And having said that, if the goal is to exercise or to train, you want to be refueling your body and refueling your muscles. And you can't do that if I'm going to exercise at 6 a.m. and then eat my first meal at midday. You can't refuel and replenish your body effectively if you're fasting. So from that perspective alone, I don't like most of my ladies fasting, because I want them to train, not exercise, and I want them to get some performance-based benefits out of those sessions, get stronger, get fitter, get faster, build some lean muscle mass. And it's really difficult to do that if you're fasting for half the day and you're not eating proper meals. It's really hard to get all of your required nutrition in just kind of 2-3 solid meals of the day if it's that back-ended eating. And we do know that larger meals at nighttime can sometimes impact sleep, impact digestion. And there is a little bit of research around that longevity and digestive health, that it's not even a huge fast. Like sometimes just extending the overnight fast 12 hours can be beneficial as well. And I would argue that most healthy women should probably be having 12 hours between dinner and lunch, breakfast the next morning anyway. But most of us, the reality is we're eating later at 7 or 8 at night. Then we're snacking until maybe, 8:39, we've had some dessert. Then we're waking up and we're eating just because, it's breakfast, we're eating, or we think we should have something pre-workout or post-work or etc. So there is a bit of research around that kind of 12 hours. So your last meal at 6 or 7 o'clock, the next meal of the morning shouldn't really be till sort of that 7 or 8 o'clock to give your body that extended fast, which may have some longevity, cellular health benefits, gut health, digestive benefits as well. So it doesn't have to be anything crazy. 12 to 14 hours may be enough. But if you are a female, particularly going through those perimenopausal years, and particularly who is training pretty heavily, like if you're off to a yoga, you're going to walk the dog, you can fast, it's probably fine. But if you are doing any form of strength or conditioning type of or intense kind of workout, you probably do want to fuel a little bit beforehand, just a small amount of carb or protein, and then have a proper balanced breakfast when you finish that workout. And there's some newer research coming through about that, and a lot of the exercise and hormonal experts such as Stacey Sims agree with that train of thought as well.
True. And I would also say that I would never tell a client to not eat if they were hungry. So, for example, just say you got into a routine of doing a longer fast once a week. So you thought, right, after a Saturday night dinner out or Sunday lunch, I'm going to extend the fast because I've eaten a lot. If my client was up at 8 or 9 o'clock and starving, I wouldn't say don't eat and ignore that hunger. So I think it can be a really useful tool to get back in touch with hunger, particularly when we do overeat at times and coming into the Christmas period where there are celebrations and feasting and, you want to be able to go, and that's what we work hard for, to go and enjoy good food with friends and family. We're certainly not encouraging people to not ever indulge. That's not the message of the Nutrition Couch. More, it's having strategies to support health and well-being and longevity, even though we do have those eating occasions. So I would say use it as an opportunity to reset hunger when you have had heavier meals or celebration. But if you then wake up and do a walk on Sunday morning and are hungry by 8:30, I would say definitely fuel your body. I would never override extreme hunger with fasting just to try and get a metabolic benefit. So that's a sign your body is burning your food well and you need nutrients. So ride off that. And if anything, for most of us, it's ending the eating occasion earlier most nights and making sure you're getting that decent break without food, because that's where most of us get it a little bit wrong. We're happy to snack until 8 or 9, 10 at night and then wonder why we're not hungry for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just add to your point, you were saying sometimes you get questions around like extended, water fast. And these are multiple days. Like I follow a big influencer at the moment. She's a mummy blogger and she's trying to do a 2-3 day extended just water fast. And if I'm being honest, I have not seen enough research to support that. And when I look at someone's diet quality overall, there's so many things that I would change first rather than just putting them through like an extended water fast. Like where most Australians are probably not eating enough vegetables. We're not sleeping enough. We're scrolling too much. We're not training efficiently. We're not eating enough vegetables. We're not eating enough whole grains. It's just there's so much wrong with the diet before even adding something like that, which is pretty extreme, into the mix. And a lot of people are saying that, there's XYZ benefits. But if I'm being honest, I haven't actually seen the research papers to really support this. And in particular, even if there are small papers, it might be in animal-based studies, but it's certainly not in hormonal females within that 30, 40, 50-year age group. So the extended fasting, particularly water fasting, is a hard no from me. As I said, I've had clients that enjoy fasting, that don't mind it, but it's often a few days a week or off the back of a heavier weekend. It's not 7 days a week. It's not something they actually do long term. So I'm not a huge fan of extended
I'll be
water
very
fasting.
surprised if we ever see that research, because I think it's that whole idea that you're being virtuous if you do it. But to me, there's not any evidence for just having water. But what I was going to also say is that if for anyone listening who has stomach problems, constipation, gas, one of the worst things you can do for that is not eat in the morning, because that's one where we tend to get our fibre-rich foods, whole grain bread, cereal, which gets the gut going. And because of circadian rhythm programming, our digestive system is programmed to process food in the day. So if you're one of the many females listening who have tummy problems and you feel constipation, bloating, don't go to the bathroom as regularly, one of the worst things you can do is delay that first meal, because naturally it will impact metabolism and also your dietary fibre intake. Which leads, of course, to our second point of chat today, which is all about constipation. And I bring to the chair our leading expert in gut health, Leanne Ward. can take the floor.
Thank you very much. I'll take it away. So there's been a lot of media coverage around these new constipation guidelines from the BDA. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that is, it's the British Dietetic Association. And about a month ago or so, they published these new guidelines on chronic long-term constipation. And it's had a lot of media press around it because one thing in particular, which we'll go into in a minute, is kiwi fruits, which have been trending quite a lot. And I'd probably say a good 6 to 12 months ago, we saw some new research around kiwi fruits and constipation. And there was a big trend on Instagram. Everyone's eating their kiwi fruits. And I've seen it drop off a little bit lately, but I find it very interesting that these have actually been written into, to my knowledge, the first clinical guidelines that actually specifically say kiwi fruit, not just, fruit or fibre. So it's really, really interesting. And it marks a bit of a shift, particularly in guidelines. They're very conservative as they need to be because they're making recommendations for the general population. They don't really ever recommend supplements or really specific things. So these guidelines are they're very revolutionary. They're very good. And I was really enjoying reading through them because it really had specific things that people could do if they were someone that suffered from chronic constipation. So what the guidelines looked at, the researchers examined, I think, 75 clinical trials to come up with some recommendations around foods and drinks and supplements that people with chronic constipation could use to helpfully help them out. Now, I must say that some of the quality of these trials weren't great. Like the quality of the 75 clinical trials varied quite a lot. So basically what they did is they just came up with a consensus based on the quality of the data. So what the guidelines currently recommend, these new guidelines for chronic constipation in adults. One of the first recommendations was to eat 2 to 3 kiwi fruits per day for at least 4 weeks. You could choose either the green or gold varieties. You could eat the skin if you're into that furry kiwi skin. If you didn't, you were still going to get some benefit from it anyway, but you would probably get more benefit if you were to eat the skin as well. So do what you want with that, because why they recommend kiwi fruit, besides the fibre in it, the type of fibre in kiwi fruit swells like the water, so it helps to kind of soften the stools, and it may stimulate things like mucus production in the gut, which can help to soften stools, which is obviously really helpful in chronic constipation. And kiwi fruit also contains a really special enzyme called actinidin, and that enzyme also helps to stimulate the gut as well. So again, being quite beneficial for constipation. Now, the other one that I find was really important was they also recommended mineral-rich water. So water with a higher concentration of magnesium and sulfate, because that appeared to soften the stool and of course help with that increased bowel frequency. So what they wanted people drinking was about half a litre up to 1.5 litres of mineral-rich water, 2 to 6 weeks, basically. So a lot of these recommendations, they were saying you had to do it pretty consistently, i.e. daily, for at least 4 weeks, if not 8 weeks. The third one, which we love, Susie, because we're massive fans of magnesium, was to consider a magnesium oxide supplement. I don't like magnesium oxide as a form of magnesium. I much prefer magnesium citrate for chronic constipation. So they're saying consider a magnesium supplement about 1.5 grams a day for at least 4 weeks under medical supervision is really important. You should never just randomly take any supplements without first consulting your healthcare professional. And magnesium supplements have been shown to be really effective in terms of increasing stool frequency and helping to soften the stool as well. And then the fourth guideline they recommended, which I found so random, was...
This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever read in my life.
The last one, wait for this, was eating rye bread, which I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. Like swap your white bread to rye bread. Guess how many pieces a day, Susie?
I know, I just read it.
6 to 8 slices a day. 8 slices for 3 weeks. Who was eating 8 slices of rye bread every single day for 3 weeks? So that one I was kind of like,
You go to the toilet because you explode. That's why.
Anyway, the magnesium supplement on board, kiwi fruits on board, mineral-rich water. Yep, can do rye bread. I'm going to park that one over there. Like if you typically will have a couple of slices of bread for breakfast, maybe replace that with some rye or just a dense whole grain bread. I think is going to do you the same benefit. But 6 to 8 slices of rye bread. Like no wonder dietitians get a bad rap. That's the only thing I can say. Like,
That's researchers. That is researchers not being practical about what people eat. Like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
It's actually really hard to even find rye bread.
Yeah, you can get a good quality like a rye sourdough if you go to like a nice market or something.
$14.
Not cheap, exactly. And if you're eating 6 to 8 slices a day, you're going to need like 4 loaves a week is the other problem.
And you're also enormous.
Yeah. So that was the 4 recommendations in the guidelines. Take it as you will. Now, what has changed, I also found quite interesting, was that traditionally dietitians and research and guidelines has always recommended a really high fibre diet. And that basically means 25 to 30 grams plus of fibre a day. Now, the research are basically saying out of those 75 clinical trials that they looked through, they only found 1 that showed a benefit of a really high fibre diet. So they weren't recommending don't eat fibre, but they were basically just saying we don't actually recommend a really high fibre diet for constipation anymore, because I've certainly had clients who have been eating upwards of 35, 40 grams of fibre and they still have terrible constipation. And once we've started adding in a few things like supplements, a few diet tweaks, without worrying about the overall fibre load, that has actually really helped their chronic constipation resolve far more than just eating more and more and more and more fibre. Because we do know that when you're chronically constipated, things aren't moving through properly. You get a lot more blocked up, a lot more bloated, a lot more gassy. If you just keep adding more fibre on top of that and things aren't moving through, you're just compounding the issue. So that was one really important point that had changed in the clinical guidelines, was that they don't recommend a super high fibre diet anymore. They just emphasize basically whole foods, and then also the things I mentioned before, the kiwi fruit, the magnesium supplements, the ridiculous amount of rye bread, and then mineral-rich water as well. So just really, really interesting that this is, to my knowledge, the first guidelines that have really been specific around an exact type of food and also an exact type of supplement. Because I haven't seen that before in clinical guidelines. Have you, Susie?
No, it's certainly a little bit random, because I also know that it's very unusual to be highlighting one specific food like a kiwi. Now, yes, there's a small amount of evidence for kiwi, but it's fairly new. So I feel like this is trying to, fit in with the zone of modern nutrition advice more than anything, because I also think that saying, not super high fibre, like that's a confusing message in itself. Like there are other benefits for digestive health to have a high fibre diet. So, yeah, I think it was really novel and interesting. I think it's certainly worth listeners who have trouble with their tummy trying the kiwi fruit, trying the magnesium. When we formulated our Magnesium Restore, one of the key things was not only to aid sleep, but also to support digestive health, because people do find that it helps them go to the bathroom each day. So I think these are quite natural solutions for things rather than just going super high with the fibre. And yeah, the only one I'm like you that I think, come on, the rye bread's obscure and 6 to 8 a day is hardly feasible. So yeah, but definitely worth a try. And I know myself with my clients, there are areas that I'll try with first for digestive health. And yeah, just like to be on the cutting edge of what's going on nutritionally out there. So excellent.
I will say quickly though, I have had quite a few clients who have taken kiwi and they have found it to be very effective. So I do think that is worth a trial and is probably a really easy thing to do for a lot of people. They're not the cheapest type of fruit, and a lot of people don't like the furry skin, but I have had a lot of clients who have found it to be quite effective, but they have sort of stayed on that longer term, like they've been taking 2 kiwi fruit a day, for months on end kind of thing. So it is, again, that consistency that matters. You can't just take it, three days in a row and then not take it for 3 months and hope that it resolves your chronic constipation. It really is about consistency.
And the trouble with that now is they're going out of season. So they do become relatively expensive. Personally, I will also try with clients just a really good cereal regularly. So whether it's an all bran or a multigrain wheat, because it's got a mix. Particularly, I like the multigrain. They've got the soluble fibre at really high levels, or in the case of all bran, the wheat fibre, and also relatively inexpensive, because some of the supplements really start to get up there in prices if you're trying specific constipation ones. But food first, and with the gut, it always tends to work best if you give nutrients as a synergistic effect of those. So there's some things that our listeners can try. All right, Leanne, well, it's party season. We've been plattering it up, and long-term listeners of the podcast will know that Leanne and I were devastated and mourned for quite some time when our capsicum dip or our vegetable dip disappeared from Aldi and Coles. It really changed the nature of our platters for quite some time, and there was a mourning period. Now, someone suggested we try eggplant dip, and we were just like, that is not the same.
We're horrified.
Yeah, horrified. But I found something that's pretty good, Leanne, and this does feature in our newly released Nutrition Couch product guide. But we've come back to our friends at Yumi's, who were the original manufacturers of the Mediterranean vegetable dip. So maybe they have listened to us, Leanne. because this Yumi's capsicum and roasted cashew nut is pretty strong nutritionally.
And it tastes pretty good.
It's as close as I can get to that in terms of fat content, because the biggest issue generally with commercial dips is that the majority of them have a base of cream cheese or oil, and hence are very, very high in fat, not the right types of fat. For anyone who is always on the seed oil bandwagon, certainly dips can be a very rich source of that. And then if you have dips that are more vegetable, they don't always taste amazing, you know, like they're pretty bland, or, you know, you've got to have stuff you like to eat as well. So this Yumi's dip, which is available at Coles and Woolworths. In Woolworths, it comes in a little 3-pack, which I like for portion control, or at Coles. Now, in some cases, dips are the same across brands or no-name brands. So, for example, it's entirely possible that Yumi's will be manufacturing for someone like Coles or Woolies, and so the Coles roast capsicum dip may be the same. That is not the case in this instance. I checked the Coles roast capsicum dip, which is cheaper, and I think the first ingredient was cream cheese, so not the same. So you are paying a bit more for a brand like Yumi's, but in this case getting a better quality product. I'll read the ingredients first, actually, because I think that gives a better perspective. The first ingredient, Leanne, is red capsicum, 39%. So straight away, if you've got a dip with a vegetable base, you're on the right track. Followed by potato, canola oil, 12% cashew. Now, that's a very high percentage of cashew, and if you've got cashew allergies like Leanne does, you can't have it. But it's actually a very high level of cashew or nut product to improve the nutritional profile. Onion, salt, egg, garlic, food acids, which is a very innocent ingredient. Basil, a little bit of sugar, tiny amount I'd say. Chili pepper, and 1 preservative to stop it going bad, as well as mustard. That is about as clean an ingredient list as you'll get, apart from being pure avocado. So I'll read the per 100. Now, per serve is hard because the serving size, I think, is 20 grams. Let's be honest, no one's eating 20 grams of dip. But per 100 grams, it's 4.1 grams of protein, 21 grams of carbohydrate, just over 200 calories, so pretty good. 200 calories at 932 kilojoules. Very low saturated fat, Leanne, only 1.1 grams, which is a good thing, whereas the cream cheese dips will be higher in fat and higher in saturated fat, and then only 13.6 grams of fat per 100, so over that 10%, but pretty low. Most commercial dips are 20, 30, even up to 50% fat for the pesto type dips. So to me, this is a very good product. If you can stick to a tablespoon or two, you're really looking at less than 100 calories, quite insignificant, very little fat. You're getting some whole food. It tastes good. That's the other thing, because I think in the recent weeks, Leanne, we've been a bit guilty of recommending products we hadn't necessarily tried, and we got some very strong feedback. It wasn't great, a couple of products. I've tried this and always include it on my platters now, and I can say, and I've had it with you as well, it's a really good one. So top marks from us. I'm giving it 4 out of 5, and it's a good addition to your party platters this summer holidays.
I will say that taste is a personal preference though, because we've had a few people being like, oh, I didn't like that feta. Oh, I didn't like that soup. You didn't like it, but we did. Like, I love that soup. I have it regularly. Whereas, 1 or 2 people write in and say, oh, that wasn't nice. Taste is a very personal preference. The Heinz one, the green Heinz one. It was really strong.
That was Leanne's product, so she's taking that very personally.
I like that all the time. But again, we all have different, different taste palettes. So what one might like, someone else might not. That's fine. But yeah, I like this as well. I bought it by accident once. I think a friend brought it over, and Mia has a very severe cashew nut allergy. So me and my friend hid in the kitchen eating it, and the kids were playing, and then I haven't been able to buy it since, but it was very tasty. And I would definitely recommend it. It's gluten-free and dairy-free as well for all of our non-nut allergy listeners. And the other thing is, when you were reading out the nutritional, Susie, that was per 100 grams. That's half a tub. Like, I probably wouldn't eat half a tub of dip. I might eat a quarter or, 2-3 tablespoons, but that's a lot. Half a tub of dip is a lot. And so they're really strong nutritionals for half that amount. And I think a lot of people, if it's on a platter, you would eat far less of that, because you've also got your veggie sticks, your crackers, your cheese, etc. So I think it's a really strong product nutritionally, and I really like Yumi's as a brand overall. I think the ingredients in most of their dips are really, really solid. So I think if you're in the dip section, if they're on sale, you can't go too wrong with the majority of their brand.
Yeah, very good. I believe they've been bought by Arnott's, but remain a fairly strong company internally to date. What I was going to say about platters, actually, and something that I do, because I love a platter, we love a platter, I don't ever put the whole lot of dip or cheese out. I make them last twice, not because I'm being overly budget friendly. It's not that. It's more the more you put out, the more you eat of that kind of food. So if I put the whole container of dip or the whole block of cheese out, everyone will inevitably eat it. If I put half, they only eat that. So I just think it's a way to control portions of food that does tend to be a bit higher in fat. So you can definitely, I sort of spoon it out and put it into a smaller container. And the same with the cheese. I'll just put half the round or half. And, you know, I can always add the rest out if I need, but in more cases than not, after a few people are done and you sort of don't need to add that extra calorie load in, particularly with higher fat cheeses. So that's a little trick coming into party season.
But let's be honest, it's also better on the budget because it's expensive to buy all of the cheese and the dips and the olives and the nice crackers. Like a cheese platter can cost you $30, $50 if you're buying really nice stuff.
More. I was in the butcher the other day and this lady, I was buying marrow bones for taco and she had these cheeses. They were it was $100 worth of cheese. And I was like, you're doing a nice platter.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, you can easily spend 30 would be cheap ads. A single of brie is like $10. Like, you know, really you can spend a lot of money and they're delicious, but definitely if you can make them go that little bit further because you don't want to waste it. Because once it's been out for a few hours, you can't really use it again. And if people aren't eating it. So definitely you can sort of control consumption by limiting exposure to portions.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. All right, Leanne, do you want to wrap us up with our listener question?
All right, listener question of the week.
Let's have a look.
What are we more
doing?
around you than me? Listener question of the week.
Berberine. Oh, it's mine. Sorry, I took over your dip section. Sorry, I was being so greedy. Sorry, I got excited. Berberine. So we've covered Berberine before and I am aware of that, but it's just really doing the rounds at the moment as a super supplement. And I saw another major supplement company advertising a metabolic health supplement and I thought, oh, you're making a lot of claims there that I don't believe there's data to support. So we might review that without getting ourselves sued. I think generally when you see supplements claiming to save the world, if it's too good to be true, it usually is. If the answer to health, longevity, glucose control, weight loss was in a single capsule, the pharmaceutical companies would have made it years ago. It's taken them this long to make GLP medications, which are actually quite a basic concept. So I think if it's too good to be true, it usually is. And that is certainly my experience with Berberine. Berberine is a plant-based supplement that has been argued to help control blood glucose levels. There is a smidge of evidence for this. I have had no clinical experience with positive outcomes with Berberine. I've taken it just out of interest, nothing. I had a client with severe PCOS who really wanted to avoid medication, took it at a high dose, nothing. I see no evidence for it or have had no experience to suggest it's helpful. I think there are far better things you can do for blood glucose control, like going for a walk after meals, like food sequencing where you eat your protein, veggies first and then your carbohydrates. Or if you really have blood glucose control issues, you're probably better to go on metformin because it's a very effective medication with very few side effects and very beneficial for cell health long term. So yeah, I'm not a fan and I know it's doing the rounds on TikTok and things like that, but I can tell you firsthand there's not evidence for it in my clinical experience. It doesn't work.
It's very limited when I dove into the evidence as well. The people tout it as like the natural Ozempic, but we need to be really clear.
Nothing
it
like
is
that.
Nothing like that. And the clinical level of, and that research is nothing like it. And the responses that you get at a clinical level are nothing like that either. And you really do need to use it at quite a high dose. So the research is around 1 to 1.5 grams a day, which in some people can actually have side effects like nausea, constipation, diarrhea. And that's sort of the main downside of people taking something like, you know, another medication for blood sugar control because they're like, oh, I don't want to have the nausea, or same thing with Ozempic, they're like, I don't want the side effects. A high dose of Berberine, which is the effective clinical dose, is very likely to give you some of those side effects as well. But like you, I've had a handful of clients on it. Most didn't report anything. I had one client who really liked it and she said that it controlled hunger more than anything. Like she just felt she wasn't as hungry all day long. And then she stops it, she finds the hunger comes back. But again, it had nothing to really do with blood sugar control and insulin sensitivity, which is why a lot of people are actually using it. So I don't think it's going to hurt most people, but I do think you have to take the right amount for it to be effective. And I think like most things, people take a couple of, for a couple of days, forget for a couple of days, like they just take it sporadically in the lowest dose possible and it's really not going to do much. So if you're going to do it, give it a red hot crack, take the effective dose and take it for a good, 8 to 12 weeks and really make sure it's doing something. Go and get your blood sugars measured at the doctor, go get your HbA1c and compare that to your last set of bloods to actually see if it's actually doing anything. If not, it's just a waste of money at the end of the day.
Yeah. If it was that effective, Big Pharma would have claimed it years ago and sold it under script. Like, that's the other thing. That's the cynical view of it. Big Pharma would have identified it as something that absolutely controlled levels and put a patent on it. So that's another reason I believe it isn't clinically proven. I just want to go back to Ozempic. What GLP medications do is quite serious. Not only did they delay gastric emptying, but they control some of the appetite control hormones in the digestive tract, and that also increases the production of insulin in the pancreas. These are serious drugs. Now, for people who need them, they can be extremely effective, but they are not to be sneezed at. Like, you cannot compare anything to a GLP. It's not the same thing. I see it all the time, on those, they say this recipe is the same, these oats are the same as GLP or Ozempic. It's complete BS, and it's completely misleading because, for example, Berberine or say a metformin, which is an oral medication, they work on the cell in a very gentle way. In the case of a GLP, they are working on an organ and completely changing metabolism. So these are serious medications and should be talked about as such, and we should never be comparing a food to the effect of a serious medication like that. So let's be very, very clear. You cannot mimic Ozempic from dietary changes or even oral medication at this point. They are in the process of developing and releasing oral versions of GLP medications, but to date these are not available. It's a rant. We got a lot of feedback about our rant. Everyone loved it. We have to rant more often.
Positive feedback, we must say.
So, yeah, that also annoys me. You cannot be talking about serious medications like that. So that's a little rant. All right, Leanne. Well, that brings us to the end of the Nutrition Couch for another week. Please keep telling your friends about us. And if you haven't seen our supplement range designed by dietitians, that's our new hydrate mix, especially for summer. And you can learn all about our evidence-based supplement range, which have clinical evidence behind them to support the various outcomes we're promoting. So we'll catch you next week for our regular episode drop. Thanks for listening.
Catch you next week.